Appearing poor has nothing to do with money. It is a scent, an invisible mark, a signal others catch before you even enter the room. It is the silent language of scarcity, the gaze that seeks approval, the body that asks for permission, the voice that reveals urgency. The world reacts to this with cruel precision, not out of malice, but instinct. Where there is need, there is fertile ground for domination. Where there is lack, there is space for contempt. Machiavelli knew, men respect only what appears costly, and when you signal that your value is low, no one hesitates to treat you as disposable. The most disturbing part is the obvious one. You may be despised not for what you are, but for what you appear to be. And most men don't even realize they are emitting signals that place them at the bottom of the hierarchy before they say a single word. The poverty that destroys a man is not financial, it is perceptual. It settles long before the bank balance does. It appears in the way you occupy space, how you react to another's gaze, how you try to justify your existence in environments that never demanded explanations. The world reads these signals with a speed you cannot control. And to the human mind, the appearance of scarcity is always interpreted as a sign of vulnerability. It doesn't matter who you are inside. What matters is what you transmit unintentionally. Machiavelli observed that men judge more by the eyes than by touch. Visual judgment creates immediate hierarchy. The man who seems to need something is classified as inferior before speaking a single word, and that classification determines how he will be treated, with distance, condescension, or silent disdain. To appear poor is to carry on your body a tacit request for acceptance, and every request reveals weakness. He who asks has already lost because he exposed his urgency. Urgency is the opposite of power. Power is what can wait. Observe a common situation at work. The man who enters a room insecure forces unnecessary smiles, fidgets with his hands, tries to become pleasant to neutralize his own doubt. Whoever notices this, even the incompetent, already feels above him. Psychological hierarchy is established within seconds, and the inferior rarely recovers that lost position. This has nothing to do with justice. It has to do with instinctive reading. The world responds to what the body announces, not what the mouth promises. In personal relationships, the mechanism is even more brutal. Emotional neediness has texture. It appears when you speak too fast, try too hard to be understood, give attention before receiving it. These signals are translated as cheap, and everything cheap loses value. The man who appears poor does not command his own energy. He tries to compensate with words for what his presence cannot sustain. And the more he speaks, the more he reveals the absence of inner power. Even in simple social contexts like a meeting with friends or strangers, the perception of poverty appears in the slouched posture, the eagerness to agree, the anxiety to fill silence. He who fears silence appears fragile. And where there is fragility, there is room for manipulation. The law is implacable. The world does not react to merit. It reacts to symbol. And the clearest symbol of power is the absence of need. This law manifests every day. The man who does not chase attention receives more attention. The man who does not try to convince inspires more trust. The man who shows no haste appears more valuable. The paradox is clear. He who seems to need less receives more. He who seems to need more is discarded first. Perceptual poverty is therefore a strategic error, and like every strategic error, it can be corrected, not with display but with internal reconstruction and external signals of self-control. The man who controls his own rhythm, who observes before acting, who keeps his energy contained, changes the way he is read. He stops appearing poor because he stops appearing available. And availability is the true currency of weakness. The perception of poverty is born from three sources: the posture that asks, the emotion that overflows, the speech that overexplains. When you eliminate these three roots, the hierarchy shifts, not because others become better, but because you stop offering openings. Appearance in the game of power is not vanity. It is warning. It tells the world how much effort will be required to control you. If the cost seems low, someone will try. If the cost seems high, No one dares. Perceptual poverty is above all a sign of low cost, and low cost always attracts predators. Contempt is not born from malice. It comes from the silent reading each person makes of the space around them. A man who appears weak does not evoke compassion, he evokes tests. The human mind, since ancient times, interprets vulnerability as an invitation, and anything that seems easy to dominate is automatically devalued. Machiavelli understood this with precision. Men fear losing assets more than losing people, not because assets are more important, but because they symbolize power. And whatever threatens power provokes reaction. Whatever threatens nothing is ignored. A man who appears poor, fragile, or emotionally exposed falls exactly into that category. Too irrelevant to be feared, too weak to be respected. The mechanism is automatic. When someone notices hesitation in your gaze, they test your limits. When they sense urgency in your voice, they test your resistance. When they see you accept interruptions, they test how far they can go. These tests are not conscious. They are social instincts. Human beings measure value by observing how you react to the slightest friction. And if you yield quickly, the hierarchy closes over you. In the workplace, this becomes brutal. The man who talks by over-explaining loses authority. The one who justifies himself before being questioned surrenders territory. The one who shows anxiety to be approved places himself below, even without realizing it. And once placed below, he is kept there because his posture indicates he will accept it. This process is silent. There are no warnings. No one tells you, you lost respect. Contempt simply settles. It appears in the tone of voice they use with you, in the tasks they delegate, in the way they ignore your suggestions. You feel it, but you don't understand it. And because you don't understand, you repeat the same behaviors that reinforce your inferior position. In personal relationships, the mechanism is even sharper. A person who senses that you fear losing them begins to control the rhythm. Whoever controls the rhythm controls the bond. The man who shows neediness becomes an object of emotional manipulation, not because the other planned it, but because the natural dynamic forces that result. The one who wants too much always loses to the one who can wait. Contempt is born when your presence weighs less than your absence. This happens when you offer value before being evaluated, when you give attention before receiving, when you open your life before opening your perception. You become predictable, and the predictable is never valued. In social environments, the tests are quick. Someone interrupts you, you immediately fall silent. Someone makes a joke at your expense. You laugh so you don't seem sensitive. Someone ignores you. You rush to recover the connection. Each reaction confirms your lower place, and once the hierarchy is confirmed, it is rarely reversed. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. People do not want to dominate you. They just don't want to be dominated. So they test everyone around them. And whoever shows weakness first assumes the lowest position. The man who doesn't understand this lives confused, believing kindness attracts reciprocity. It doesn't. Kindness without strength is read as submission. Submission awakens contempt, not gratitude. When you appear poor, not financially but internally, you signal that you accept little, and whoever accepts little receives little. This is the mechanism. You are not despised because you are weak. You are despised because you display weakness, and everything that is displayed becomes a tool for others to adjust their position above you. The world tests those who seem testable. The rest, it avoids challenging. Status is not wealth. Status is perception. It is the way others interpret the cost of confronting you, ignoring you, or replacing you. And that perception forms before any dialogue. It is born in the details you consider irrelevant, but the world uses to define your position in the hierarchy. The man who seems poor is not merely someone with little. He is someone whose presence announces a lack of structure. Uncertain movements, clothes chosen without intention, scattered energy, eyes searching for orientation. All of it communicates that his existence still depends on the environment, and what depends too much loses value. The body is the first symbol of status. It does not need to be large, only controlled. Economical movements, steady rhythm, absence of restlessness. A body that moves with discipline projects stability. A body that moves excessively reveals anxiety. And anxiety is a sign of low value. The face is the second symbol. Micro-expressions of doubt, rushed smiles, eyes that track everything to avoid missing anything. Excessive vigilance exposes fear. And fear, when perceptible, lowers any man. Clothing is the third symbol, not for the brand but for the coherence. The man who wears whatever he finds communicates improvisation. Improvising is not flexibility, it is lack of axis. The world tends to respect those who appear to have a defined identity, not those who shift shape to be accepted. Yet the greatest traitor of status is not the body or the clothing. It is the energy. Energy without form undermines respect. The man who talks fast, laughs loudly, explains himself without being asked, or tries to fill silence with justifications. All of this creates an image of excessive availability. Availability is cheapness, and what is cheap is never treated with care. Silence is an even more powerful indicator. Silence born from insecurity is read as inferiority. Silence born from control is read as superiority. The difference is not in volume, but in perceived intention. The silence of the weak is retreat. The silence of the strong is territory. Status also appears in how you react to unexpected stimuli. A provocative comment, a challenging gaze, an aggressive interruption. The man who rushes responds with emotion. The man who dominates remains still for a moment, not to think, but to signal he was not affected. That imperceptible pause immediately alters the social reading. What does not react too quickly is dangerous. What reacts too quickly is predictable. There are subtler, almost invisible signs that expose weakness. The constant need to explain your choices, urgency to be understood, fear of appearing distant, the habit of laughing to soften tension, excessive use of words to compensate for the absence of authority. Each of these behaviors constructs a silent architecture, an architecture that defines your value before the world discovers your real capacity. And the cruelest part is simple. A man can be competent, intelligent, disciplined. But if the external architecture does not support that, no one will see it. Internal value without external signal is invisible, and what is invisible is treated as irrelevant. Contempt is not a declaration. It is a behavior. It arises when your posture communicates that you pose no threat. Human beings respect what they fear, and fear what they do not understand. When everything about you is predictable, accessible, too clear, mystery dissolves, and respect dissolves with it. Status is not about being admired. Status is about not being reduced. And reduction begins with the signals you ignore. True transformation doesn't begin on the outside. It begins where no one sees, the internal center of gravity. The man who seems poor on the inside will never appear valuable on the outside. And that is why any attempt to impose oneself through aesthetics, speech, or attitude collapses when the core remains fragile. The first reform is silent, learning to contain one's own energy. Most people speak too much, react too much, feel too much. Constant expression is a form of leakage, and everything that leaks too early loses value. The impenetrable man is not the one who doesn't feel. He is the one who doesn't give. He holds his impulses until they become useful force, not waste. Containment is not repression. Repression is fear. Containment is dominion. The difference lies in intention. The repressed fights against himself. The contained governs himself. The second reform is emotional, removing urgency from human relations. The man who needs to be accepted is condemned to submission. He who depends kneels, even without noticing. The impenetrable does not seek approval, because he knows approval is unstable currency. He operates from an internal axis that needs no validation from anyone. This axis is not pride, it is independence. The third reform is psychological, abandoning the fantasy of automatic reciprocity. The world does not respond to your character, it responds to your strength. Kindness without structure becomes weakness. Availability without limits becomes servitude. The man who understands this stops being outraged by others' behavior. He observes. He calculates. He reacts only when the reaction produces advantage. The impenetrable does not waste movements. He walks slowly, speaks little, keeps his gaze steady, not as intimidation, but as economy. Every gesture is intentional, and perceived intent is what produces respect, not emotional intensity. There is also a subtler reform, reducing mental noise. Rushed thoughts create rushed behaviors. Rushed behaviors create the perception of desperation. The man who controls his own mind slows his inner pace until nothing drags him. The world notices and hesitates. This hesitation is the first layer of power. Another pillar of internal reform is the ability to withstand silence. The weak fear what they cannot fill. The strong use silence as territory. When you do not hurry to answer, explain, or justify yourself, you force the other to reveal more than they intended. The absence of reaction is a tool. He who does not move sets the rhythm. The impenetrable also learns to separate emotion from expression. Feeling is not weakness. Exposing feeling is. Emotion is raw material for strategic action. Exposure is waste. The man who masters this boundary stops being read as predictable, and what is not predictable becomes intimidating. Finally, the last reform is the deepest, accepting that power is not intensity, but consistency. The world fears the unstable because it is dangerous, but respects the consistent because it is inevitable. The impenetrable man does not oscillate. He keeps the same posture in victory and loss, in presence and absence. This silent constancy creates an aura of authority that cannot be faked. Internal reform does not make a man hard, it makes him opaque. And everything opaque resists intrusion. What cannot be invaded cannot be despised. Once the inner axis is established, the surface stops being decoration and becomes a weapon. The man who has rebuilt his own core begins to understand that appearance is not vanity. It is signaling. The world does not read your essence. It reads your signals. And the surface is the place where those signals are deposited, shaped, and interpreted. External reconstruction begins with the body. Not the body shaped for display, but the body shaped for presence. The upright posture, the slow rhythm, the unhurried movement. Every motion you make communicates how much you respect yourself, and the world merely reproduces that treatment. He who presents himself as a malleable object will be shaped without resistance. He who presents himself as a rigid structure becomes difficult to move. Then comes the gaze. Not the aggressive gaze, but the gaze that observes without asking for a response. The gaze that analyzes before reacting. When you look this way, you signal that you are not competing for space. You are assessing the territory. This reading instantly changes how others behave around you. The man whose gaze exposes insecurity loses status before he speaks. The man whose gaze remains steady becomes unpredictable, and the unpredictable is rarely tested. The voice is another instrument. It does not need to be deep, it needs to be controlled. Speak slowly, without haste, without high notes. The voice that does not rush conveys sovereignty. The voice that hurries reveals anxiety, and anxiety always reduces perceived value. Concise speech creates distance. Excessive speech creates exposure. You rise in the hierarchy when your words begin to cost more than your silence. The third layer of external reconstruction is style, not in the aesthetic sense, but the symbolic one. Coherent clothing, clean, with a clear identity. Nothing flashy, nothing begging. Coherence is what matters. The man who chooses each piece with intention communicates discipline. The man who wears whatever he finds communicates improvisation, and improvising is a way of appearing poor. The environment also adjusts to the new axis. When you walk with precision, people listen. When you answer only what is necessary, people pay attention. When you stop trying to please, people reposition themselves. You stop being part of the scenery and become a fixed point within it. There is also social reconstruction, the most discreet and the most powerful. It consists of reducing access. The less access others have to your time, the higher your value. The less predictable you become, the greater the respect. The man who is always available loses importance. The man who is difficult to reach becomes a reference. Calculated absence is stronger than constant presence. Another essential point is mastery of physical space. Entering an environment without hurry, occupying little space, but occupying it firmly. Sitting in a stable way, not restless. Standing with distributed weight, not shifted. The body that appears balanced in any territory is interpreted as superior in that territory. External reconstruction also requires eliminating signs of submission, smiling to dissolve tension, tilting the head when confronted, touching objects excessively out of nervousness, moving the hands to justify words, reacting too quickly to provocations. When you remove these gestures, perception changes effortlessly. The world reads you as someone who carries a price, and what has a price is handled with caution. Finally, external reconstruction only works because it reflects the internal one. A surface without a core is theater. A core without a surface is wasted. True power is born when the two align. The man who reaches this point does not need to ask for respect. He provokes it naturally. In the end, the world does not judge you for what you are, but for what you allow yourself to appear to be. The perception others have of you shapes the space you will occupy, the way you will be treated, and the boundary they will never dare to cross. The man who appears cheap is used. The man who appears available is forgotten. The man who appears poor, even if strong, is reduced before he acts. The question that remains is simple and unsettling. How much of the contempt you receive is the result of what you have become? And how much is the result of what you allow others to see? If the answer hurts, it is because it has found the part of you that you still do not command.